Hi, thank you so much for joining me today to talk about accessibility standards and guidance for people with cognitive disabilities, low literacy, low proficiency. I'll be talking to you about resources from the W3C Web Accessibility Initiative, or WAI, today on this International Easy Language Day. And I want to thank the interpreters for a translation into Russian. We've been talking today a lot about language, and I want to look at some of the broader issues related to accessibility by people with cognitive disabilities. In addition to language, there's things like text format. So whether the text, how big it is, what is the font face, what is the spacing, that impacts readability. Also, when we're talking about websites and applications, we look at the issues with the user interface. That is how the application is designed, how it's laid out, how things are labeled. And all these are related and interrelated, and we'll talk about some of those coming up. I'm going to tell you about some of the work going on at the W3C, that's the Web Accessibility Consortium. And the W3C defines the international standards for the web. Within W3C, we have a group called the Web Accessibility Initiative, or WAI. And WAI focuses specifically on people with disabilities. Now, we've introduced some of the issues with language and cognitive accessibility, but at W3C, we look at all disabilities, including vision, hearing, motor, physical, speech. So we look at the broad range of accessibility needs. While we do focus on disability, the things that you do, that we do for accessibility for people with disabilities actually benefit everybody. And that's behind one of our taglines: web accessibility is essential for some people with disabilities and useful for all, even if you don't have disabilities, because of situational limitations and other instances, that you will find that the things that we do to make things accessible for people with disabilities are useful for everyone. So for example, what we do for people with cognitive disabilities, learning disabilities, intellectual disabilities, and neurodiversity ends up benefiting and helping people with low literacy or people with low proficiency in the language. At the W3C, we define different types of standards. I'm going to talk about the guidelines is one type, and then the technical specifications. It's like the underlying code. We also develop supporting resources, that is, things that help you to implement accessibility and to implement the standards. And one of those is WCAG. What do I mean by that? That is the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines, or the acronym is WCAG, which I say is WCAG, but I'll say WCAG today. WCAG, or WCAG, is used for web pages, for mobile applications, for documents, for software. So it has a large scope in which it's used. It is referenced in international policies and other standards. For example, ISO, IEC 40500, and European EN 301549. Now, I will note that WCAG itself is actually not written in plain language or simple language for a lot of important reasons, including the ones above, that it's referenced in international standards and needs to be highly testable and applicable, needs to apply in many different situations. I'll give you just a couple of points on an overview of WCAG. It's organized first by 4 principles, and then under each principle are guidelines, and under the guidelines are what we call success criteria. And the success criteria are the testable statements. That's what really defines if you meet WCAG. Also note that the success criteria are at 3 different levels: A, AA, AAA. Most organizations and governments require level AA. A big thing I want to say is, if you are getting started learning about this or pointing others to learn about it, please start at the WCAG overview page. Don't jump right into the standards themselves, but start with the overview page so that you understand what is in the standard. And that is on the web, free, at w3.org/WAI/WCAG. Next, I want to tell you a little about what we have on coverage of cognitive accessibility in WCAG. One of the things that's covered is language. There's a guideline that's about making language readable. It says, make text context readable and understandable. And underneath that are success criteria that go into more detail on language, reading level, unusual words, abbreviation, and pronunciation. And that's something you're probably very familiar with around easy language. It also covers things related to the user interface, such as adaptable, create content that can be presented in different ways, distinguishable, make it easy for users to see and hear content, enough time, provide users enough time to read and use content, navigable, that is, provide ways to help users navigate, find content, and determine where they are. Predictable, make web pages appear and operate in predictable ways. Input assistance, help users avoid and correct mistakes. And those are some of the user interface aspects covered in WCAG. In addition to the standards in WCAG, we have separate guidance in a resource called Making Content Usable for People with Cognitive and Learning Disabilities. This is not a standard, it's additional optional information to help make your web content and other content more accessible. The short name for that is COGA usable, C-O-G-A usable. COGA usable is the short name for that document. That also covers more about language under an objective of use clear and understandable content. And that's very similar to the easy to read checklist from Inclusion Europe that probably most of you are very, very familiar with. It also has guidance on user interface accessibility for people with cognitive disabilities, including help users avoid mistakes, help users focus, help users find what they need, help users understand what things are and how to use them, ensure processes do not rely on memory, provide help and support adaptation and personalization. And again, this here is just the high level, and in the document, there's much more explanation, examples, and details on each of these. I want to talk a little bit more about the last one, support adaptation and personalization. At W3C, we have projects working on personalization. Some examples of personalization. Let's say you get easily distracted, and so you want to hide, and you're looking at a web page, you want to hide the extra information that you don't need to complete the task. That's an example of personalization. So you can't read text and you use symbols. That's an example of personalization. Let's say you have dyscalculia, which means you have difficulty processing numbers. So you want to change the numbers into pictures, text. So for example, a website or an app may say the temperature is 0 degrees Celsius or 32 degrees Fahrenheit, but you can't process the numbers easily. So you want to change that. And instead you get a picture of a person who's in mittens and a hat and a sweater, and the text is very cold. That's an example of personalization. And W3C is developing technical standards for personalization. That's a current ongoing project. Another project is around pronunciation, how you pronounce or say things. Actually, how technology pronounces things. I have a picture of a person who is blind using a white cane, walking down the sidewalk with an electronic device. And I'll talk about that in a minute. We're talking about pronunciation by technology using text-to-speech. So for example, screen readers, which are used by people who are blind and some people with cognitive disabilities to read out the information from the computer or an electronic device. Text-to-speech is also very popular now in many places with voice assistants on your mobile phone. It's becoming common. So I want to give you an example. I have a street address, a house address, not too far away from where I am. And it has some abbreviations. So it's 123 Maple, abbreviation DR period, and then an abbreviation ST period, Paul, an abbreviation MINN, okay? Now, when we look at that, the correct pronunciation of that would be 123 Maple Drive, St. Paul, Minnesota, the state. However, some text-to-speech will mispronounce that as 123 Maple Doctor, Street, Paul, Min. And that's what that's what we're trying to address. Another example, there's a word in the phrase, reading a book is pronounced, the same word, spelled the same way, is pronounced very differently if it is the city in England, which is pronounced Reading. So reading, Reading, same word, same spelling, different pronunciation depending on context. Some of these examples are maybe not too important, but there are situations in which correct pronunciation is very important, such as in education and assessment, that is like testing students. Therefore, W3C is developing technical standards around pronunciation. This will allow the person, whoever's developing the content, to define how it should be pronounced, and then the technology can pronounce it appropriately. We also have another project. The Easy Reading Project is a European Commission funded project that W3C participates in, and we would welcome your contribution to that as well. I'll take questions here in a minute. Before I do, I wanted to have a couple of closing comments. I will have put up links to get more information about the things that I've mentioned on a web page. It's all strung together, no spaces, but it's w3.org/WAI/presentations/Easy Language 2021. And from there you can get the links to more information on all these things that I've mentioned. I also want to make sure you understand that you're invited to contribute. The W3C is all about collaboration, working together, bringing people from around the world to make resources and standards better. So you're invited to comment, to review, or more actively participate in our work. You can find out about that work from our website. You can also subscribe to get email or join us on social media. This email is a very low traffic site. I only send about usually less than 3 messages per month. So you won't get a lot of messages, so you can focus specifically on new resources or things, drafts, D-R-A-F-T-S, drafts that are available for review. Okay, finally a word from a neighbor friend of mine. All right, so I hope that you'll help make the web accessible, easy language and beyond. Again, on the W3C Way website, we have a lot of free resources to help you with making your all your work accessible for people with cognitive disabilities, low literacy, and low proficiency. So I hope that you find the accessibility standards and guidance useful, and that you let us know how we can help you and you can contribute to this work.